people are watching you more closely than you think. Not because you're famous. Not because you've announced some grand plan. Sometimes the most interesting person in the room is the one nobody expects to become dangerous to the old order. You're quietly changing your habits, sharpening your mind, rebuilding your confidence, and suddenly people who never spoke to you are paying attention from a distance. That's the funny thing about potential. You rarely recognize who notices it first. You think nobody cares because nobody is applauding. You assume you're invisible because your progress isn't being announced. Meanwhile, someone with experience is watching how you handle pressure. Someone successful is noticing your discipline. Someone influential is paying attention to whether you keep showing up when nobody is rewarding you. You think they're watching the results. They're watching the pattern. Anyone can have one good day. Anyone can make one impressive move. Anyone can talk about ambition when everything is going well. But consistency tells a different story. It reveals whether your confidence is real or temporary, whether your discipline survives boredom, whether you can keep your emotions under control when circumstances become uncomfortable. And that's where people start becoming curious, because the person who keeps improving without demanding attention becomes difficult to categorize. You're not begging to be noticed. You're not announcing every move. You're simply building, quietly, repeatedly, patiently. That's the kind of behavior experienced people recognize because they understand something the average crowd doesn't. Potential rarely arrives with a warning label. The strange part is that you may be waiting for someone to validate you while someone else is already studying your trajectory. They notice how you recover from failure. They notice whether you blame everyone else or take responsibility. They notice how you treat people when you have nothing to gain. They notice whether you disappear when the excitement fades. So don't become obsessed with being seen. Become undeniable. Because the most important observers aren't always the ones standing in front of you. Sometimes they're watching silently, waiting to see whether the person they noticed yesterday will still be standing tomorrow, still improving, still disciplined, still moving forward while everyone else is busy trying to figure out why you refuse to remain ordinary. Most people think important people are watching the loudest person in the room. The one making announcements, showing off achievements, talking about plans, and constantly reminding everyone how successful they're going to become. But experienced people usually look for something much less entertaining. They watch patterns. They watch consistency. They watch what happens after the excitement disappears. Anyone can look impressive for a week. Anyone can make promises when motivation is high. Anyone can post the perfect picture and talk about becoming unstoppable. But consistency is where the performance becomes difficult. That's where people start noticing. Because discipline doesn't need an audience. It doesn't care whether anyone is impressed. You wake up and do the work when nobody is watching. You keep learning when nobody is praising you. You continue improving when the results are still too small to celebrate. You keep your word to yourself even when breaking it would be easier. That's a signal, and people with experience know how rare that signal is. They've seen talented people disappear. They've watched ambitious people lose interest after the first setback. They've watched confident people collapse when criticism arrived. They've watched people become obsessed with appearing successful while quietly avoiding the work required to actually become successful. So, when someone keeps showing up, something changes. They start paying attention. Not because you've already achieved everything, but because you're demonstrating something more valuable than a temporary victory. You're demonstrating reliability. You're showing that your behavior doesn't depend entirely on your mood, your circumstances, or the amount of applause you're receiving. That's the difference between motivation and discipline. Motivation says, I'll do it when I feel inspired. Discipline says, I'll do it because I decided to. And that second person becomes interesting Because consistency compounds in ways people can't immediately see. One day of effort looks insignificant. 1 month looks promising. 1 year can completely change the direction of a life. The people who understand growth know this. They don't need you to prove everything today. They're watching whether your actions suggest you'll still be building tomorrow. That's why your quiet progress matters. You may think nobody notices because nobody is commenting. You may assume you're invisible because the results haven't become dramatic. But attention doesn't always look like applause. Sometimes it looks like someone remembering your name, someone mentioning your work, someone quietly checking what you've been doing, someone waiting to see whether your progress is temporary or whether you've actually changed the way you operate. You can't fake consistency for very long. Eventually your habits reveal you, your discipline reveals you, your preparation reveals you, your response to failure reveals you, your behavior when nobody is watching reveals you. That's why you shouldn't reveal you to look impressive. It's not really terrible. Build the kind of consistency that makes appearances unnecessary. Let other people chase attention while you build evidence. Let them announce what they're going to do while you quietly do it. Because eventually the people who understand real potential stop listening to what you claim and start watching what you repeatedly do. And once your pattern becomes impossible to ignore, your quiet discipline starts speaking louder than every performance around you without requiring you to ask anyone to pay attention to it. Your progress doesn't need an announcement. That's what makes it interesting. The loudest people usually want everyone to know they're changing before they've actually changed anything. They announce the new routine, the new goal, the new business, the new mindset, and then 3 weeks later the excitement disappears. The audience moves on, and so do they. Meanwhile, you're doing something far less glamorous. You're building quietly. Nobody hears about every morning you chose discipline over comfort. Nobody sees every hour you spend learning something that doesn't produce immediate results. Nobody knows how many times you wanted to quit but decided to continue anyway. Those moments don't look impressive from the outside. They look ordinary, almost boring, but ordinary actions repeated long enough become extraordinary results. That's the part people underestimate. You don't need to convince anyone you're evolving. You don't need to tell the world that you're becoming more disciplined. You don't need to post every achievement or explain every change in your life. The strongest transformation often happens without an audience because you're not performing anymore. You're actually becoming, and that's a completely different game. When you're performing, you need approval. When you're building, you need patience. One depends on attention. The other depends on commitment. The people who understand success can usually tell the difference. They've seen enough empty promises to recognize real movement. They know that someone who constantly talks about their future may simply be addicted to imagining it. They also know that someone quietly improving their skills, habits, health, relationships, and decision-making is creating something much more valuable than a temporary impression. They're creating momentum. Momentum doesn't need permission. It doesn't need applause. It simply continues. One improvement creates another. Better habits create better decisions. Better decisions create better opportunities. Better opportunities create stronger confidence. Stronger confidence creates more disciplined action. Suddenly, the person who thought they was doing nothing special has created a completely different life through hundreds of small choices nobody bothered to notice. Can be powerful. It doesn't give critics much to attack. It doesn't give doubters much to predict. It doesn't give jail to a detailed statute to analyze. And you simply keep moving because you're not constantly announcing your deluxe move, because you're not constantly announcing your next move. People can't measure you through your words. They have to watch your behavior. They notice that you're becoming more focused. They notice that you don't react to every distraction. They notice that you're less interested in proving yourself and more interested in improving yourself. That's when curiosity begins. People start wondering what changed. They may not understand the process, but they can see the pattern. The old version of you reacted. The new version observes. The old version needed validation. The new version needs direction. The old version talked about potential. The new version builds evidence, and eventually the results become visible enough that nobody needs an explanation. Your progress starts speaking for itself. The people who ignored the early stages suddenly notice the outcome, and they may wonder when everything changed, never realizing that the transformation happened quietly through hundreds of ordinary decisions made while nobody was watching, while you kept improving without asking the world to notice, until your progress became too consistent to dismiss and too visible to pretend it wasn't happening. Pressure reveals people faster than success ever could. Success can hide weaknesses because everything is going well. When the doors are opening, the money is coming, people are complimenting you, and nobody is questioning your decisions, almost anyone can look confident. But pressure removes the costume. It forces your habits, character, and mindset to come to the surface without asking permission. That's why experienced people pay attention to how you behave when things go wrong. They aren't impressed by someone who celebrates when everything works. They're watching what happens when the plan fails. Do you panic? Do you blame everyone else? Do you disappear? Do you become reckless? Or do you pause, think, adjust, and keep moving? That's the real test. Anyone can control their emotions when nothing is threatening them. The interesting person is the one who can feel anger, fear, disappointment, and uncertainty without allowing those emotions to make every decision. That doesn't mean becoming emotionless. It means becoming responsible for what you do with those emotions. People with experience recognize that immediately. They've seen talented people destroy opportunities because they couldn't handle criticism. They've seen intelligent people sabotage relationships because their ego couldn't tolerate disagreement. They've seen ambitious people quit because their first failure bruised their pride. They've watched people who looked unstoppable collapse the moment reality stopped cooperating. So, when they encounter someone who remains steady under pressure, they pay attention, not because that person is perfect, because they're teachable, because they adapt, because they don't need every situation to go their way. Before they continue, pressure reveals whether your confidence comes from circumstances or from identity. If your confidence disappears every time someone criticizes you, then your confidence was probably borrowed from approval. But if criticism makes you reflect, improve, and continue without losing yourself, something deeper has been built. That's the kind of strength people remember. They notice how you treat people when you're frustrated. They notice whether you become cruel when you're disappointed. They notice whether you keep your promises when nobody is checking. They notice whether you take responsibility when you make mistakes. They notice whether you can accept correction without turning it into an attack on your identity. Those details matter. Because character isn't what you claim when you're comfortable, is what you reveal when comfort disappears. The funny thing is that most people don't realize they're being observed. They think every difficult moment is just another problem to survive. They don't realize those moments are also information. Someone is learning how you operate. Someone is deciding whether they can trust you. Someone is watching whether your confidence survives inconvenience. You don't need to perform for these observers. That's the mistake. Trying to look impressive under pressure usually creates more pressure. Instead, stay grounded, think clearly, admit mistakes when necessary, protect your boundaries, keep moving. Let your behavior reveal who you are without turning every difficult moment into a performance. Eventually, the people who matter stop asking what you say you're capable of and start looking at how you respond when life refuses to cooperate. Because pressure has a way of exposing the difference between temporary confidence and real character. between someone who needs perfect conditions to perform and someone who can remain focused, adaptable, disciplined, and responsible, even when everything around them becomes uncertain. And that difference is often what separates someone merely chasing success from someone genuinely prepared to handle it when it finally arrives. The world has enough people trying desperately to be noticed. Everyone wants attention. Everyone wants recognition. Everyone wants someone important to look at them and say, "You're special." And that's where they make the mistake. They spend so much energy trying to attract attention that they forget to become someone worth paying attention to. You don't need to chase every opportunity just because it has an audience attached to it. You don't need to announce every goal. You don't need to convince strangers that you're talented. You don't need to constantly prove that you're working harder than everyone else. The more you chase attention, the more dependent you become on other people's reactions. Build skills that make you useful. Build discipline that makes you reliable. Build character that makes your decisions sharper. Build relationships based on respect. Instead of desperation, build a reputation that instead of advertisements, that's how it's all begging no one to the notice him as real way parties. Real. They come from simply belong you and to notice come little good and yes, it will be laying low. Low. They come from being prepared when the right moment appears. Someone remembers the person who solved a difficult problem. Someone remembers the person who stayed calm during a crisis. Someone remembers the person who consistently delivered when everyone else was making excuses. That's reputation, and reputation moves quietly. You may never know who heard about your work. You may never know who mentioned your name in a conversation. You may never know who is observing your progress from a distance. That's why chasing visibility can be such a distraction. You're trying to control who sees you instead of controlling what they see. When they double imagine to every day telling everyone how talented they are, the other spends every day becoming more capable. The first person gets attention faster. The second person becomes harder to replace. That's the difference between popularity and value. Attention can disappear overnight. Value tends to stay. Can't disappear overnight. Stop asking, how do I get people to notice me? Ask, what can I build that deserves to be noticed? That question changes your behavior completely. You start learning. You start practicing and start solving problems instead of collecting compliments. You start protecting your reputation instead of chasing temporary approval, and eventually something strange happens. People begin finding you not because you demanded their role. You then wooing your attention, but because your work created a reason for them to look. That's when opportunities become different. You don't have to beg for every door to open, because you've spent your time becoming the kind of person someone wants behind that door. Your preparation becomes your introduction. Your consistency becomes your advertisement. Your character becomes your recommendation, and the people with influence understand this better than anyone. They don't need another person who talks beautifully for 5 minutes. They need someone who can perform when the pressure arrives, someone who can think, someone who can adapt, someone who can be trusted, someone who doesn't collapse when the spotlight disappears. So let everyone else chase the spotlight. You chase competence, let them chase applause. You chase mastery, let them explain how successful they're going to become. You quietly become useful enough, reliable enough, disciplined enough, and prepared enough that when the right people finally notice your path, they don't just see someone asking to be given an opportunity. They see someone who has already spent years preparing to make that opportunity worth giving. While everyone else was busy trying to be seen, instead of becoming impossible to overlook through the quality of what they built, when nobody was watching, there comes a point where you stop trying to convince people that you're capable and start becoming the kind of person they can't ignore. Not because you're demanding attention, but because your actions have become too consistent to overlook. You stop announcing every plan and start producing results. You stop explaining your potential and start developing it. You stop asking whether people believe in you and start asking whether you're becoming someone worthy of your own belief. That's a completely different mindset. Most people want recognition before they have built anything worth recognizing. They want the title before mastering the skill. They want the audience before creating something valuable. They want respect before demonstrating reliability. And when recognition doesn't arrive immediately, they become frustrated. But real growth doesn't work like that. First you build, then you improve, then you repeat, then you become difficult to ignore. The process is rarely exciting from the outside. It's hours of practice nobody sees. It's studying when everyone else is distracted. It's showing up when motivation disappears. It's correcting mistakes without making excuses. It's learning from criticism without allowing criticism to define you. It's continuing after the excitement has faded and the results still look small. That's where the separation hazard can be impressive for a moment. Very few people can become impressive. Consistency creates credibility. Credibility creates trust. Trust creates opportunities. Create opportunities, something that the possibility that you should stop worrying about whether intentional, whether and watching. Agree that what things which are you don't control who is watching. You control what they eventually see. You should see someone who keeps their word, someone who learns quickly, someone who handles pressure without becoming reckless, someone who treats people with respect even when there is nothing to gain, even when there is nothing to respect you and can accept a mistake without falling apart, someone who needs constant applause, continuous what makes a person excellent, memorable, not person who makes a person memorable, reward, not when affecting patterns, the frozen who keeps a person most of the thing else, amazing, for me, holding the value of looking so really with my You don't want to spend your time explaining why you deserve to walk through it. You want your preparation to answer for you. Let people underestimate you. Let them ordinary. Letting them things. You're not making noise. You have nothing to prove in the early stages. You have something to build. And while they're watching the surface, keep working underneath it. Strengthen the mind. Sharpen the skills. Protect the reputation. Improve the habits. Become more reliable. Become more adaptable. Become more disciplined. Become the person who can handle the opportunity instead of simply dreaming about receiving it. Eventually, the results begin speaking in a language nobody can easily dismiss. The quiet worker becomes the trusted professional. The underestimated person becomes the obvious choice. The person nobody noticed becomes the person people start asking of them. But the most satisfying part isn't hearing them finally say your name. It's realizing you became so focused on becoming better. The reason they were that their attention stopped being the reading in and by the time the right people finally recognize the path you've been building, you're no longer waiting for someone to tell you that you're capable, because the evidence is already visible in everything you've consistently become.